like last time I was up there, I was like, what the F am I doing up here? Knowing where I was at in life at that point, like I didn't have anything to lose but my life.
This is Jordan Gall, a senior communications associate living in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and you're listening to the Vance Crowe podcast.
Ben Anderson, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you.
You know, you are a rare person because I had known you for probably all of 15 minutes. And then I sent you a text message maybe a week after we had met and said, I need somebody to drive me to Kansas, to Manhattan, Kansas. Would you want to go with me? And you said yes. And so you agreed to at least 10 hours in the car plus 24 hours or whatever we were at K-State University giving this talk. Why in the world did you say yes?
I'll call you out first because you emailed me the next day, and it was 2 or 3 days later after we went back and forth like twice that you asked me. Okay. So you didn't even wait a week.
Fair
we
enough.
Didn't do dinner first, nothing. But I think I told you this, is that like my rationale in a situation like that where meeting at an event of that caliber, I didn't know who you were. Of course, I Googled you, etc. But to get an email asking to drive you to Kansas under any circumstances, it's one of those, I don't regret really anything, I think, in my past, but I don't want to think about things that I could have done that I elected not to with a, oh man, what could have happened there type scenario. So, like I said, I only had one meeting that day, pushed it off, and was like, yeah, no brainer.
Well, it was amazing. I knew that you had started your own company up, but I did not really understand your backstory. And I don't think we were more than like 10 minutes into the ride. And I was like, I don't know why this is happening, that this guy is the guy driving me, but this seems like divine intervention because we had a fantastic time. So why don't you talk a little bit about what you do? You are a college dropout that runs their own app company. It sounds like crazy person talk.
Yeah, it seems like crazy person times most of the time when going about the day to day, I guess. I moved back to, or not back to St. Louis. I lived in Missouri. I moved back to Missouri to go to WashU, and I was there studying biomedical engineering, and that wasn't exactly complementary with a tech startup that was beginning to gain some traction. So once it became clear that like a priority kind of had to be latched onto, then made the not easy decision, but made the clear decision at the time to kind of pivot out of school for a little bit and focus full time on this. It's
how far into your schooling did you get?
A semester. A semester taking like some a la carte classes and floating around, figuring out like if BME was even what I wanted to go degree wise for. And it's second time second time deferring at WashU. I was enrolled 3 years ago, but didn't end up following through then either for a different business. But.
So you had been in school, then left it and went and started another company. What'd your company do?
The first one, I never even made it into WashU. I'd applied and I graduated high school a little bit early. And
how early?
A semester early.
Okay.
So I graduated the December before getting out.
All right.
But and I think we talked about this maybe a little bit. My buddy and I, we had been watching a show called Nathan for You on Comedy Central and got a real kick out of it. And kind of had like a vocal meditation session with each other in the gym one day about how if we were to sell air, how would we go about selling air? And we determined that we would test indoor air quality and sell air purification systems. So we ran with that.
Really?
Yeah.
And so, okay, you and I had this conversation, and I remember when you told me this part of it, I actually started to get a little like wary. I was like, okay, this is a guy that wants to sell air, and then he does. You go out and your company was relatively successful. You sold these devices. But when you gave me your background, I was like, all right, that's a fair point. That was a legitimate business. So tell me a little bit more about what you're doing.
About what I'm doing now?
No, your air quality, your selling air business.
It
makes you sound like a dick.
Yeah, no. And a lot of times I think I am a dick, but it depends on like what, in what, when you're put in reference to something. I mean, I'm not a dick, but I mean, when, if with something like that, we kind of aggressively just decided to pursue that idea maybe. And, in terms of like why it would maybe seem dickish just to keep harping on the word dick and get past it, at that time was we like thought about like the relative scale of like, this is the worst possible quality of air and this is the best possible quality of air. And so that we could push ourselves up against that betterment side, we were like, we need to partner with the best company out there so that we can take, because the relative indoor air quality, it's like it's hovering towards the better side. And like when put in reference to like the absolute worst, of course, like it's objectively good. So we had to find a product that would push further along to the other side of that. So we would go in and test the air quality for free. That was the whole like, door to door, like how can we get in here and get somebody to make a decision? It's free indoor air quality test. We will show you what your air is right now. We will bring in our unit and we will show you what it could be. So then that's where it's like you could teeter the line of like what was, we threw around the term snake oil a lot whenever we were driving. And I don't think at any point we were snake oil salesmen, because at the end of the day, we were improving their overall situation in terms of like their quality inside their homes. But
I happen to know a woman that oversees the grantees of the Sloan Foundation.
Sure.
And one of the big grantees they did was testing air quality.
Yeah.
And what kind of correlations they're coming up with various like challenges, asthma for children, all different kinds of things. And she legitimately was like, everyone I meet, I tell them, get an air purifier.
See,
if I had not met her, I would have thought that because the way you framed it, right? Yeah. You were like, what can we sell? Let's go sell air. I mean, it sounds like a high school prank idea that then you turned real. But I do actually think that there's value there. And
it very much was at the time our mentality. And then that's where kind of like going down sometimes, and I feel like we even did the same thing to a degree with Wand, like found the problem statement with and kind of overemphasized the pain point. And then as we were going down the journey of building that business, really finding out like how much validity there was behind that pain point to actually like become passionate about it along the way, outside of kind of like our initial ideation. So AirTech was a great case in point for that happening, or really, I guess, the first time that it happened for.
I mean, there's only a certain kind of person that can do that. I mean, like that, I wouldn't recommend that way of thinking about starting most businesses. But you have, I talk about the Big Five personality test all the time, and there's one. Are you familiar with it? Like
the Big Five is that I don't know the Big Five.
Introversion and extroversion.
Sure.
Openness to new ideas, agreeableness, trait neuroticism, which is like how likely are you to have an emotional reaction to things, and then industriousness. So industriousness is like how likely are you if you start a project to finish it.
Right.
And they break down into subcategories, but they're really interesting. Most of the time, I am one of the more open people. When you look at that openness scale and you say like, who in the room is the furthest on this distribution? And that means that you're inspired by ideas. Music can kick things off in your head. Going to see art sparks things with you. I think you might be a couple standard deviations beyond me on openness, and I'm pretty open. So are you inspired by art and stuff? I mean, the way that you come up with these ideas is way different than other people.
I grew an appreciation for art, I would say, probably more so after, like, way after that fact. It was after coming to St. Louis that I started to really appreciate art, like having access to our free museums and stuff, rolling in there and kind of, it was our mutual friend, like Jared. He related one of the first times we sat down. Jared Holst. Yeah, give him the full shout out.
Yeah, he deserves it.
Yeah.
He's the man.
100%. But he told me one of the times we sat down, he had just seen At Eternity's Gate with Willem Dafoe, where he plays Vince Van Gogh, and we were talking about like kind of the parallelism between art and entrepreneurship. And once that dot was kind of tied for me, like seeing where, and then like I said, my favorite word is gall, right? Like sometimes in art, I think especially, it's not necessarily about the creative instinct or like what you're putting out there being objectively good or whatever. It's having the gall to put paintbrush to canvas and just kind of move it around until something comes together, and you have that gall to put it out into the world and say, this is my piece, tell me what you think. And when it elicits emotion in people, then that's the beauty of art. And like going around and seeing that in like art, like in museums and stuff, like trying to figure out what emotion the artist wanted to elicit versus what is actually being elicited, and then tying that back to entrepreneurship. It's like the initial gall of having that
a
desire.
Business, yeah.
Exactly.
I have something to sell you.
Yeah, I have something to sell you, and I need to just kind of put boot to ground and move forward until it's sold, I guess, for lack of a better rap to that analogy.
Is fantastic. I had never made that connection. And I've been diving deep in art lately. Like I feel like during different people's lives, they kind of hit these various renaissance periods, kind of like a wave. Sometimes you're really into it, and then other times it's not so much. And for a long time, music was really important to me. So I was just absorbing as much as I could.
Sure.
But lately I've been looking at art, and in particular, the St. Louis Art Museum. And I was walking through the museum first with my wife just on Saturday. And she goes in to see Monet's water lilies. And we have like a national treasure in our art museum that we have a giant Monet, and it's the water lilies. And my wife can stare at it and it immediately makes her happy. It makes her feel warm and safe. And, she just loves it. And she can stare at it for a long time. And then I was there yesterday for lunch. And I got done with lunch and I was like, all right, well, I'm going to walk through the museum and just go see the Monet. And there were all these kids in there. And they were like first grade or second grade maybe. And it was astounding to me because I don't know when water lilies was painted. 100 years ago maybe?
I know nothing.
So these children are sitting there, and some of them are totally entranced by it. I mean, there's kids running around and talking and making noise and doing all kinds of stuff. But there are a couple of kids that they're just staring at the picture. And you think an artist had some sensation, some voice, some feeling, something that they were able to put an idea out there that was so close to the human experience that it can capture my wife all the way down to a little child. It's amazing.
Yeah. And I have no developing thought on that. And in terms of, how it elicits on, because you're kind of broad framing that idea. It sounds like this is objectively, you're insinuating that piece of art is objectively good, or that there's an objective response from youth to like present age that piece was meant to
there's
like elicit.
Some level of mastery that when you achieve it, I'm coming to the conclusion that this Jungian idea of like an archetypal sensation or feeling or something can be placed out into the world, and it can transcend time. And I mean, whether you put it like a polarity on it, like good or bad, I don't know. But I know that painting will capture people's attention for hundreds, if not thousands of more years. And that to me is amazing. Like, how is that possible that it doesn't matter what age we're in, it's still going to capture people?
Right. With people. And do you think they're capturing people with that specific archetype, or it's like the objective captivism of like that piece? Or I guess dive deeper into that.
I mean, I really don't know. So I sent you this video before you came over, which was talking about the inner Damon that people have. And just to give a quick description of it, and this is like a ham-fisted version, but my understanding of the Damon is all of us, every single person has a voice down inside of us that wants to be expressed in some way. Some people can hear it, some people can feel it. And it's that guiding principle that tells you this is who you are. And if you don't cover over it, if you don't try and push down that voice and ignore it, you will go to do some dangerous or wild things. and yet it will bring you closer and closer to your purpose. And the people that get close enough to their purpose, because as you get better, that's mastery, right? The way you hear the voice better is you just keep working on your art over and over and over again. And eventually you strip away the parts of your life that aren't that voice. And then it allows you to create something that transcends time.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you have a Damon? Do you hear a voice?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I think that's like not, I don't know, because I hear my voice and I also don't hear my voice. I think it was one of the books I told you to read that I've just finished. I wish I remembered the author's name so I could shout it out, but the book was called Shadow Dance. And I've been trying to get more into like the shadow integration side of like Jungian kind of study to elicit that sort of creativity, because I think like something for me is like, I think in a lot of ways, I mean, I'm creative with business, but in a lot of ways I'm not creative. So I've like tried to go outside of like my standard path to elicit more of that creativity. And then I guess getting into the shadow stuff, 100%, I think that everybody has that aspect, but I think that there's a problem in today's world of wanting to, instead of integrate that Damon, that shadow, whatever term you want to put on it, that like sin, whatever, and integrate it into an acknowledgement of your full self and take pride in, go ahead.
Let me pause you in there. When you talk about a shadow, I have a sense of what you mean, but if you were going to describe this to somebody that had never heard this idea before, how would you describe it? The shadow is my impulsive, I don't even know if negativity, I'd want to put the term negativity on it, I guess like impulsively, but I don't even know if it's negative. It's just like if I wake up and I don't want to get up, like that's my impulsive decision of like not wanting to get up. And I think it's like those impulsive urges that we overcome on a daily basis, I think is maybe how I would define the shadow. Is it your natural desires? Is it and it's without polarity? It's without somebody telling you this is good or this is bad. If you just took or you had the power to take what you wanted, that your shadow would have weight, right? That's like I'm not even sure who says this. This is Jung. This is me describing probably Dr. Jordan Peterson describing Jung, but your shadow is what gives your soul weight.
Right.
It's the thing that you are a good person only if you're capable of doing bad and you choose not to.
Right. Which is kind of like where and I think that's where the problem statement comes in terms of like today. Well, not even like societal problems, or whatever, but I think that's one of the issues in today's world is we're not acknowledging our potential for abuse of power. We're trying to lean farther to the other side where we insinuate that we don't have that capacity for abuse at all. Like people saying, oh, I'm, benevolently all good, and I don't have that part of me in me. But if you don't acknowledge that and take pride in overcoming that at like your conscious level of expression, then I think, I don't know, if I had to pick one of those two avenues, I would rather be conscious of my potential for abuse and bad than blissfully ignorant to the fact that it's there and operating at like the highest level of that hierarchy, and assuming I don't.
I mean, I completely understand that, because if you think of yourself as a person that can't do bad, then what you end up doing is you justify all these other things to yourself. You say, well, I'm not a bad person, but I'm going to take this detour, or I'm going to take advantage in this situation, or I'm going to do this negative thing. Because if you've come to the conclusion that either there is no objectively good or bad person, or maybe subjectively even, but that you have somehow transcended this because of your deep reasoning skills or your intellect or just your niceness, then you are actually missing out on a huge percentage of your ability to exist, to understand the world around you.
Right, which I think goes back to that video you sent me, to go back to that in terms of like how to express mastery and purpose. Because if you think of like the persona of the person who's blocking out that 50% of, their themselves really, and only operating in that latter 50%, then they're shutting off all of the positive potential that can flow through from that side of themselves as well. And I think that's where like in Like in that video you sent me, they talk about integrating the Damon to find purpose or to express mastery, because it's only when you're able to integrate that full sense of self and then move confidently forward with the full acknowledgement of your full potential that you're able to express that mastery and find that purpose and operate as close to, that inner drive, that voice of creativity and this is what I should be doing as possible.
I think a person that my listeners would know about is a guy named Jason Bachman, who runs Strange Donuts. I don't know if you heard that interview, but in the interview, he comes on. I didn't know him very well at all. Like, we'd seen each other at the gym and I'd been like, hey man, but he's like huge. So I'm kind of like, hey Jason. And he's like, hey, what's up? He is, a fascinating guy because he runs this donut shop and he has a 2% turnover of employees every year. Like, the ordinary restaurant has 130%. Yeah. So I have him on the podcast and we're sitting here talking and I eventually say, how do you have this 2% turnover rate? Like, what's going on there? And he goes, well, I had kind of a rough life going on when I was a kid. And so I think I know what people are going through. So I know how to treat them right. And I'm like, what do you mean you had kind of a rough time? He was like, oh, I got in some trouble. I'm like, what do you mean trouble? Like smoking behind the high school or what? And he was like, no, when I was 14 years old, I was an enforcer at a crack house. And he tells the story of going all the way to being sentenced to prison. And a judge at the very last minute granted him mercy. And so he decides on his walk home from there that he's going to change his life. But he is this huge hulking guy that has seen the darker side of the world, gone all the way to the edge. He has stories of being in jail and having all these things. He is capable of doing bad and he knows it, but he chooses not to. And now he's like the most amazing person to be around because he doesn't have any pretenses. He's not trying to be somebody that he's not. His persona, his mask is totally taken off. I think that's describing what you're saying.
No, totally. And I would totally agree, which I guess calls back to like that broader problem of so many people like moving through their walks of life, assuming that they don't have that aspect of themselves and that potential, and looking, and then that's where it goes beyond being an issue, like a personal issue of insinuating like your blissful ignorance that you don't have that, but looking to others and thinking of them as those binary creatures. It's like, oh, this guy is either bad or good, versus it sounds like if I had to, and I'd love to talk with him about this, if I had to put myself like in his head, I would insinuate, knowing that he's got that side of himself or whatever, he's able to look at others and look past their negativities, because it's that dichotomy that you've got the potential for both, to not judge somebody by their overexpression of one or the other, but just to kind of broad frame.
Yeah, and it
that
probably
persona.
allows, if you can see both sides and you don't just reject one or say you're completely rejected because you have this one, then you're able to look at the best in people and bring it out in them, and not naively. You're doing it in a way of saying, like, as I make you more powerful, as I make you stronger, as I build you up, your capacity to do evil goes up, but it also is the place for good. Right.
No, totally. Yeah.
I don't even remember how we got here, but the shadow concept is one that it has really helped me start to understand that you're wasting your time if you don't take a full look at yourself. And I think that's one of the things that I got from journaling, because if you ever start to be actually honest with yourself in your journal, not like, hey, I'm writing this journal and someday maybe I'll be Ben Franklin and somebody's going to go back and read this, but you actually write down, this is where I fell down, this is where I missed the mark, your world starts to change.
Right. You got to write down, not with that like arrogant mindset of like, oh, what if somebody reads this someday? Am I going to feel vulnerable? Like if somebody reads my, like whatever happened, what's today, like February 20th, like me stumbling here. Like if you're trying to lie to yourself in your journal, like that's the first level of like altering your persona because of ego as you're like expressing yourself out in the world. Like if you can't put down your true self and your true thoughts in your journal, like that's the first layer outside of yourself.
Then there's nowhere you can.
You'll never be able
to be connected with a spouse. your best friend and you will have way more distance, because you're exactly right. If you can't find a way to articulate it to yourself, and this is something Dr. Peterson said, you don't know what you think until you say it out loud.
Right.
And so you go to write stuff down in your journal and you're like, whoa, I didn't know I thought that. Do
Right.
I think that? Who wrote that? Was that me?
Right.
And people may be sitting there saying like, no, that doesn't really happen, but try it.
Yeah. 100%. Like you are not, what's the saying? Yeah. You're not your thoughts, actions, or emotions. Right. And like whenever you're putting those things to paper, you get to kind of zoom out and be like, whoa, where did that thought come from? Right.
Yeah. And that's, when you try and meditate and you realize how much of your day you spent bombarded with thoughts,
yeah,
that the act of trying to clear your mind and just not focus on your to-do list or what happened in that fight last night or what you're planning on doing this weekend, but if instead you try and say, anytime there's a thought, I'm just going to focus on my breath. I'm going to have my mind be clear. It becomes very obvious how much of your life you spend having these voices bounce around in your head that you don't control and you can't turn off.
Right. And like where there's a separation between where you go during that meditative state versus where those voices are coming from is, yeah.
Oh man, that's pretty deep. What do you mean? Tell me more.
In terms of like how, and we touched on this a little bit like in the car, in terms of like how you as yourself, or like where that point is we go when we meditate, how that expresses itself through those voices. That's those voices being like the ego, like, and that being a separation from your truest expression of yourself, and how close or far apart those two things are from each other can have a direct impact on, I think, at least maybe controversially, the authenticity that you have whenever you're moving throughout the world and the impact that you have the potential to make on other people.
You have very low ego. Like by the time I'm sure everybody's got their own ego to deal with, but I had never met a person that we had known each other for, I don't know, maybe an hour or two. And you were very, very open to like feedback and understanding and like, what am I reflecting to you that you can reflect back to me? It was a really amazing experience to be around a person that's like, let's just talk. There's no right or wrong answer here. Let's just talk. Right.
Because there is no right or wrong answer. And it's kind of like, that there's a lot of people that may or may not hear this and like disagree that I have more ego, because, and then it was a problem I think I probably had that I overcame after a certain point of like consciously working on that side of myself. But once kind of going down that track, I realized the value that can come whenever you start to ignore that ego as an aspect of your true self. So being
when you say the ego, what do you mean?
When I say the ego, I'm meaning that voice, my thoughts, sometimes my actions, and really my emotions. Like what's the instinctual emotion? Like on my way over here, I thought about it and I thought it might come up. So I'm going to go ahead and tell the story anyways, because I think it was meant to. On my way over here, I had to turn around on, I don't remember the road, because I took a wrong turn off of 64. And I'm at the stoplight, like literally probably 2 blocks from this house I had to turn around in. This dude knocks on my window. He's fuming. He's like, hey, you ever turn around in my driveway again, I've got your license plate. And I was like, here. And then that was one of those times where I'm like, okay, this whole like burst of anger is about to come up through me. And I had to like really like consciously separate that ego, I think, from myself, and that like, what am I going to do? Yell back at this guy? I'm like, okay, next time I'm needing to specifically turn around on whatever this road is called, I'll like make sure not to do it in your driveway, versus like that spew back, that impulsivity, I guess, to wrap that thought and conclude your question. I think that's the ego. Like those aspects of yourself.
The ego that wants to watch you snap back at him and get a point on the cosmic scale.
Yeah, exactly.
Or have a better story.
Right. Yeah. Like one up through anger, one up through action, or one up through, anything really. Like how am I, ego is like, how am I better than you? really, in like a comparison versus like we're all the same.
I know that. So you and I both had a similar experience, although at different times. You lost a bunch of weight when you were in high school, and I lost a bunch of weight when I was in my 30s. And I think doing something as monumental as losing weight and keeping it off is I mean, almost entirely a mission of the psyche, or like you're really just it's not a war on the surface where you're eating the food. It's a war much deeper. And I remember when I first started to have success at losing weight, I started looking at anybody else that I deemed to be not as good as me to be like absolute failures. They're gross. Like they're not doing it. They have no discipline. And then one day it clicked, like, everything that you see in them that you don't like is actually something you are afraid to see in yourself.
Yep.
And once you have that and you can actually let it go, and it takes a while, right? Because you keep having these thoughts sneak in and you're like, no, but that person's really disgusting because they don't have this level of discipline or they're weak. Once you start to absorb that, then that's integrating your shadow in a way, right? Because then
you hit the nail on the head. Like one of the main points of that book is like, seeing things and things you criticize like outside yourself or things that you're afraid to acknowledge within yourself. But
yeah, I mean, and I think about that, and I think about the people that I really get annoyed by, and all of a sudden I realize those are caricatures they in my mind of what I do not want to be. And I'm definitely afraid that I am.
Yeah. No, it's a scary thing to have fear, but it's a scary thing sometimes whenever you're going down that path, whenever you see like that not even that capacity for, badness or whatever, but the things that you are afraid that you are, right? Like that is a scary thing for sure.
And then the cool thing is, and this happens every time, like at least it doesn't get any easier. It hasn't gotten any easier for me on whatever few steps of this journey I've taken. Like it's a frightening thing. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, but now that I know this, I can do something about it.
Right.
But like there's that gulf between looking at it and actually looking at a dragon, right? It's all the sum of all the things that you're afraid of, and then actually encountering it and deciding you're going to do something different.
Sure. Well, yeah, you talk a lot about Jocko, and I haven't read his book. I should read the book. But,
Extreme Ownership.
Yeah, Extreme Ownership. But he talks in that about, and I only know this because a guy named Austin told me to read this book actually, and we were having this conversation. But whenever you take full responsibility of everything being your not fault, I think might be too strong of a word, but whenever you take that full responsibility, and this is me obviously talking to somebody who hasn't read the book, so maybe I haven't developed that thought process full enough, but my interpretation is that when you take that full responsibility and accept, like you can blame so many things on entropy or chaos, whether it be the weather or your car breaking down or whatever it is, but even when you get to that like base layer of being able to say like, I'm cold because it's cold outside. It's like, you should have brought a jacket. Like my car's broken because my car's, not reliable. It's like, well, you should have serviced it or bought a better car, put yourself in a position to like not have to worry about that. Really, like you have a certain empowerment at the end of like that funnel where it's like, I have complete control over everything that is in my life. To a degree. Well,
and the clearer you are over what you actually have control over, then it's a little like the way that I pictured it when I was reading this book is, imagine you're learning how to jog, and you go from being able to jog 100 yards to being able to jog a mile to being able to jog 3 miles. The more that you can jog, the more perimeter that you can run around and say, I'm aware of what's going on in this area. Kind of like all of this land is mine in some way, right? I'm responsible for it because I can see it, I can get to it, and I could do something about it. That's what Jocko's philosophy reminded me of. Like the more that you start saying, well, we might get into an accident and therefore I'm going to put blankets in the car so that way if something happens, I've got blankets in the car and I don't have to complain about it. Now I've taken that much more ground or that much more area. And I think his book is really empowering because it says having the discipline to solve these things is freedom. It's the ability to not have to worry about the things within this perimeter because you got that on lockdown because you figured out how to prepare yourself.
Yeah. I think a lot about, the empowerment through freedom, and what freedom means is that like it pertains to, taking control over things. And then that's, one of our old developers for Wand, actually, like he kind of tied those two dichotomies together for me, like where between power and freedom, and that freedom is, and shout out to Marvin, freedom is power over others, not even other individuals, but other circumstances, and power is maybe I got it backwards. Power is like control over the freedom of others. Yeah. And freedom is like freedom from the power of others, I guess, if that makes sense.
Probably that does. Yeah, you got there right at the end. I didn't get it at first, but I mean, the ability to not have to yield to the will of others is some amount of freedom from them, and then your ability to exert your will over others. And it doesn't matter. And when we say others, I take that over experiences, over all of like the full culmination of the human experience. Did you feel like you were becoming more free or less free when you decided to drop out of college?
I felt like I was becoming more free, I think. Yeah.
Do you still feel that way now, living in the world? How old are you?
21.
So you're 21 years old. You meet people all the time. They must be like, oh, where do you go to school? Because everybody that looks and sounds like you goes to school.
Right.
So how does that feel?
It's a bit of a, I guess, personal, like, and then that's where the ego still expresses itself in me, I think. And that, like, I am self-conscious when I get asked that sometimes, to say, oh, I'm still affiliated with whatever, blah, 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 et cetera. Like, when realistically, like, I don't, I'm a dropout. Like, and then that's the acknowledgement point. It's like, I've dropped out, and saying that, like, with integrating that fact and expressing it truthfully and authentically is better than tiptoeing around whenever I get asked that question, because I am self-conscious about it. Like, if I get asked, like, what are you studying in school? Like, not even being asked, where do you go to school? Or like, what are you in school? It's like, what are you studying in school? When I say I'm 21, it's like, oh, I dropped out to start a mobile app company or whatever, and blah, blah, blah. You've got to kind of shy away from the scenario, but it is what it is.
So what are you doing now?
I run a mobile app company called Wand.
All right, tell me all about it.
Yeah, Wand. I started Wand living in Denver prior to coming here for school, actually, but it was kind of like, quote unquote, started as in like putting some time and effort into it. But it was after coming here, and like really not taking advantage, but taking advantage of like the St. Louis community, and that we really started to gain some traction with that company. We won a grant, and some other good things happened to get that going off the ground. What Wand is, to actually answer, is it's a mobile app for booking housekeepers. So basically, we're applying the Uber model to the cleaning space, and started that in Denver. I did like some Airbnb management, and I would on Rover. I would go over and dog sit.
So what is Rover? Imagine people don't know what
people
any of
don't
these
know
apps
Rover.
are.
Rover's like an Uber for booking dog sitters or dog keepers. So I would go house sit a dog on Rover, and then I'd Airbnb out my place while I was doing that to kind of double up on the income, pay those Denver bills, right? But I wasn't so cheap that I wouldn't try to book a cleaner, like, sometimes after doing that. And I saw how much of a pain in the butt was to do that, really. And it was playing pool with an old co-founder one night where we like really honed in on like that problem in that space, and was like, there's a disconnect in this industry between people who are looking for, trusted, vetted cleaners easily versus cleaners who are like, where's the work, right? If you're starting off as like a freelancer, it's like, how do you get people to book you? So,
and I would imagine that in doing it as Uber has the advantage of, if you don't like the driver, you get out of the car and they're gone.
Right.
Your situation is you're inviting a person into your house and allowing them to look, see, touch, right, everything that you hold most dear.
Sure.
So how do you get around that problem?
We've had to dive pretty deep into like that whole security. Like I mentioned the grant we won last year from just like a front facing optics perspective in terms of like brand and as it pertains to security. Our platform is what's referred to as HIPAA compliant. So we meet like a medical grade level of security when it comes to how we pass data in our data around in our platform. So between that messaging, we background check all of our providers. We do like the national, sexual offender search, criminal search, then tri-county search. So something people don't realize about the background check. And then this is where like if anybody who's heard like the horror stories about the care.coms or some of these other like platforms, or not to like throw mud at any of them, because we don't know. I wouldn't know if I was in the same position as like one of those companies. Thankfully, we had a good guy in the compliance space to kind of walk us through these circumstances. But background checks aren't a regulated industry. There's no like national standard for, okay, Vance wants to background check Ben before he comes over. What is a quote unquote background check as it pertains to like that credentialing of my character? Does that make sense?
I never thought about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like there's
anybody could pop up and be like, hey, I run background checks and, we do it for the last 180 days or.
Right. Exactly. It's like, what's a background check? Did you Google me? Did you do a criminal search? Like, did you see if I have any warrants? Did you see if I've got any DUIs? Like, what did you do when you put that background check terminology on what you actually did? So we're very prevalent in our messaging and saying we did a sex offender search, national criminal search, tri-county search, et cetera. Like we've got a picture of their driver's license and we've got all of that stored in ProHub system that we use for that right now. But
and what are our people out there selling right now? Like, are there like fly by night background check companies?
Yeah, and I'll try to tiptoe around like calling any of them out, but yeah, like 100%. Like that's and I would encourage like the general consumer to, and then that's where sometimes in today's like scary data driven world, you've got to be the educated buyer in terms of like there's between not the background check not being regulated in terms of like just what's being done for the quote unquote background check. Then there's the discrepancies between like one example is like running the background check and you get your booking confirmation with say company X. And the burden of actually reviewing, because then that's something people don't even think about, is like somebody's got to review that check and objectively, like, because there's so many variables that come into like what somebody could have done wrong in their past, that there's got to be some face behind that does, okay, we approve this person on our platform, right? And we're doing that, but some companies like at scale are seeing those or not even seeing them come back. I'm saying with the example of company X, like you get your booking confirmation, somewhere in the fine print was a link to your service provider's background check, and the burden was on you to actually review that. And then that's where it kind of hit the media. Anybody who's listening can Google around and find the story of like, holy cow, somebody that I booked to come over and watch my kids was a sex offender. How'd they not catch this? And it's like the burden was on you to catch that. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And there are stories of that blowing up in people's faces?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
I don't know anything at all about this.
Which is why it's become more prevalent. We've kind of teetered hard into taking those things into account. Like, and we're still very, very much a startup, but taking those things into account from the ground and like maintaining that culture and that level of security moving up, super, super important to us.
Okay, so now somebody wants to hire a housekeeper. They go on your app and they just like they've signed up. Tell me more about this. I actually haven't. I should sign up for this.
Yeah, we didn't actually talk about it a whole lot. We talked about like everything.
No, yeah. I actually don't know anything at all about it.
So the app is definitely still rough around the edges, but it's called Wand. We've been like live for about 2 months, but you basically sign up, give the email, name, phone number. Right now we make you then add your home. So you've got to say, okay, this is my address. This is how you get in, blah, blah, blah. And then check the latitude and longitude. Here's the cleaners that are in your area. So that's like the hardest part is signing up and adding those details. But once you've got that in there, we've got really 3 different ways in the app that you can book. There's Book Now, where you'll just shoot an instant request out to the cleaners that are in the area to accept that request.
I just had a giant party at my house, and I need to get it cleaned up right now.
Exactly, like
Mom and Dad
ASAP.
get back. Okay.
Somebody take the booking. Somebody get over here. Somebody take care of it.
Okay.
We've got Book Later, which is basically picking a time and date for that. Our whole thing is 3 clicks to a cleaner. We've tried to minimize the click depth to keep it 3 clicks. Once you're inside the app and you've got the details, it's like for that simplest route, it's 3 clicks. And then Book Later, you add the time and date to if you want specific time for that. And then we've got like a tab for cleaners, and you can view. We used to let you pick the cleaner and Book Later, but we were seeing there was like an issue where, like right now, still being a startup, we don't have enough cleaners behind the platform to like have them be reliably accepting those services. So those 2 routes are just an open request any cleaner can accept. If you want to like specifically pick a cleaning provider, then we've got a cleaners tab where you can view all of the providers that are in the radius of your home. We're kind of flipping that model around. Like we'll be pushing out, I guess, like behind the scenes, like this, like first noted of like how we're flipping that model around based off of the feedback we've been seeing is like right when you download the app, it'll be like being able to view the cleaners, because that we've got, and then that's where it's like from a business standpoint, we start to see like where people are quitting in that process and like crunching that conversion funnel to optimize the platform for getting people to do what we want them to do in there, like as a business.
Because they went to the effort, like, if I download an app, it's because I want to make it work. Like, I'm really reluctant to download it. So once I do work, or I'm getting ready.
Well, you'd think that as a business owner, but we see like I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs in the space and like looked at like similar companies, and we pull like our competitor data on PitchBook and stuff, and it seems to be like the industry standards, but we see like a huge drop off just between people, and this is probably because we're only operating in 2 markets. We're operating heavy in St. Louis, and like we're getting started in Denver.
And there are people having their houses cleaned right now.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Wow.
Wand. But so we're seeing a drop off between people who download who actually sign up, people who sign up who actually add their home, people who add their home who actually book a service. And then that's where it's going to be interesting for us moving forward from here is we've got a pretty good grasp of like what it's going to look like, because we've been operating it like in beta for months, but having only been live for like 2 months, what that recurring usage is going to look like in terms of who's coming back. Like, and we're kind of seeing that. And then that's where like we're changing some of the aspects of the app around to like hone in on, like we're saying MVCs, like our most valuable customers, like short-term rental hosts are using it like religiously, because that's like we should have known from the get-go, because the initial need statement was doing Airbnb, but we kind of broadened our horizons. We were like, we got to be the Uber, every man book a cleaner for everybody. But so they're using it like 2 or 3 times a week to like book those services, because it's like an Airbnb host, the need statement's so clear. It's like just book somebody to come over and service that. So
yeah, and they're not so worried about, I mean, like they want to know it's safe, but they're not so worried about
it's not like their home or like their pet might be there or some of these things. It's just like come by for an hour and flip it for the next person to come in so I can get my paycheck.
And like, tell me about the success. Like it's going well. It's growing as fast as you expected. What do you think? It's
growing as fast as we expected. We're very much bootstrapping right now. So we're operating between these 2 markets. We're content with the success, but I'm not ecstatified. And then that's where it's a sliding scale too. Is like if I was hitting the numbers that I want to be hitting today, my numbers would be 10 paces ahead of like where I'm at that present stage, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean that's the challenge of people that you like once you become successful, then climbing up that hill is not big enough, so you got to just keep going. So it's important, I guess, like being in that stage or this stage we're at right now, to zoom out and see where we were even 4 weeks ago, or even 3 months ago, much less 6 months, 12 months ago. So objectively, I think we're doing pretty great, but I would like to be doing 10 times better. And what grant did you get in order to make some of this happen?
Yeah, safety grant. So that's, and we grew close through the course of the grant process. We were in the first cycle of winners. But it was because we had that level of cybersecurity, like in the platform. It's a company downtown that does like development for HIPAA compliant softwares and in the medical space and government contracting and lots of that sort of stuff. We won that grant, and it gave us $20,000 in capital plus like the unquantified amount of R&D, et cetera, and resources, mentorship, blah, blah, blah.
Wow.
Yeah. And we grew close throughout that process. And the founder of that grant, has since come on as our fractional CTO. So
Oh,
we're very,
wow.
very lucky. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. He's been awesome. Jerry. Yeah. I'll shout out Jerry.
And when we were making the trip, at some point, I don't remember, you told me that you got into rock climbing, which that's cool.
Yeah.
I did a little bit of rock climbing when I was out in Boulder. My buddy Court taught me how to do it. And that's all ropes. But you do it in an insane way. You do, like, or at least to me. So talk about how you do or did rock climbing.
And that's, yeah. I don't do it this way anymore, especially for all my shareholders out there. Don't worry. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, so I used to, and this is like very, very few times, like, and I'm no Alex Honnold, but I would like free solo sometimes. And I guess for visual context, people listening, I showed you a picture of me climbing. I was climbing the Flatirons in Boulder, and any like rock climber in the community knows like the Flatirons are like V6 to like V9 gradient in terms of like difficulty level. So it's really like you're playing at like kind of the base level of difficulty. Like and I'm holding up my hand so people listening can't see, but the gradient is there where if you believe, or not even believe in your skill set, but if anybody who's listened to Alex talk, he says the same thing, except he's just playing at a 10 times different level. It's like if you have conviction like in your skill and your practice, then it's less scary. So I guess, and then I didn't do it often by any means. I'm no badass, but
like, just so we're clear, this is not like a hill. It's not like a golf course or something. Like, if you fall here, you're dead.
Yeah. It's a great feeling.
So tell me about that. What is the draw? I have no draw to that. In fact, if I go to a tall hill, I mean, like heights or something that I have, I'm definitely afraid of them.
Yeah. No, and I'm definitely being arrogant and saying it's a great feeling, but there's a certain, I guess, and I told you the story, like the third time I was on there, I'll never do it again because I'm at a different stage in my life where I don't want to take those sorts of risks anymore when it comes to like, I literally might die. And I don't practice enough.
What was the draw the first time? I mean, just getting off the ground more than 6 or 7 feet up in the air.
Why do you do anything? Why do you do anything? Think of like the coolest thing you've done in like the last 6 months and tell me why you did it. I'm asking you on your podcast.
I mean, definitely go give a talk. Probably give the talk that you saw me give at the women's conference. Like,
sure.
I don't have a choice.
Yeah.
Like, it's the voice. Like,
right.
That's why that voice thing that we were talking about before, to me, that is so real.
Right.
Because I like all the moves I've made in my life, going to the Peace Corps, going to the World Bank, all of these things came because I had some voice in my head that I could hear at varying degrees. And it drove me to do it. And had I decided I wasn't going to do it, that voice would have just kept yelling in my ear, you've got to go do this. I mean, it sounds like a schizophrenic, but
right.
It's the truth.
Yeah, no, I don't think anybody was yelling in my ear, I guess. But it was sort of that same concept of like, I don't know, you do it to do it type deal. And we were young. Like we used to take, me and a friend group, we'd go out to Denver like maybe once, twice a year, like always summer. And then like maybe spring break, we'd go out there. And it was just something to do, But like, speaking from a stage, if you fall, you're going to fall 3 or 4 feet. If you say something incorrect, you can caveat it. Yeah.
In your situation, if your foot slips or a rock happens to break off, it's over.
Yeah, I think. And probably there's a healthy balance. And then that's where I say, like, I would never make those decisions again moving forward. Like I was like last time I was up there, I was like, what the F am I doing up here? Knowing where I was at in life at that point, like I didn't have anything to lose but my life when I mean, there's so many other people that'd be, and like, not to like be selfish, like losing me, but like other than, and I wasn't thinking this on the spot, like I've got nothing to lose but my life, but like in that stage, like I didn't have those same like, man, like I've got a lot going on right now type deal, like if I was to do it again. But it was, I guess, the risk. I've never been very, very risk averse, I guess. And that was maybe like me expressing it more, like overcompensating, expressing it in my youth versus like now I show like, because you could say the same thing, like I've dropped out of school, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, what happens if Juan fails? What happens if I run into a brick wall? It's like, I could, quote unquote, die. Where am I going to be at? Now I'm 4 years behind any of my peers. And yeah, so that same mentality is always kind of behind you, pushing you to not fall, I guess.
In your case, the risk you were taking there, the failure state is death.
Yeah.
Does that mean that it prompted you to think very much about death?
Yeah, I think so, probably. I mean, I've thought about that sort of thing, or that sort of thing being death, a lot, I guess.
What do you think? If you hit the bottom of the ground, you fall off the side of the mountain, within a few seconds, you're dead. Mm-hmm. Now what?
And then that's the only place I feel guilty, I guess, in that process is if the repercussions in life of who has to deal with that fallout of my death. But in terms of I'm not going to care, I'm dead. Wherever I go, I've made the right choices. If there's somewhere good or bad to go, I think I've made the right choices to go somewhere good. And if there's nothing, then I especially don't care, right? Because it's I'm dead. So. And
do you anticipate that you'll be going somewhere good or bad? Is there somewhere to go?
I'd like to think so. Yeah. I think that's where it goes. There's the parallelism between psychology and how, and then that's where I don't think my thoughts get loopy doopy in terms of expressing my belief system that's in place there. But I think we're the universe really discovering itself through what you talked about, Geoffrey West. He talks about the terminal endpoints in that book, Scale, and I kind of broad frame that concept to we're the terminal endpoints of that broader picture kind of discovering itself. So yeah, I think there's somewhere to go, and it's good.
For context, he's referring to a guy, Jeffrey West, that is at the Santa Fe Institute. And I did a podcast one time describing when I went there, they had a gatekeeper that was like, "What are you doing here?" So anybody that's ever wanted to know who I was trying to meet with, it's the guy that Ben here is referencing. So that makes my heart sing, because I think he's amazing. But I didn't come to him through the concept of any kind of spirituality. For him, it was network theory and math.
Yeah, and which is very much where I came to him as well. I was reading his book. He's got Scale, the life, death of organisms, cities, and companies. And I'm reading it. I loved that. Yeah.
So the interesting concept in there is he describes that take the heartbeat of the heart size of a mouse.
Sure.
And it is born, it grows really fast, it levels off for a while, then dies. And then you can map that directly with all the mammals based on how big they are. And the curve gets bigger the larger the heart is. And then he says, here, this will blow your mind. Not only is this true of animal hearts having this S growth curve that then drops off, but it's also true of companies. And that companies have a lifespan from when they are born, they accelerate and grow really, really fast, and then they level off, and then they die. And then he was and then to compound it even more, cities do the exact same thing, but the difference between cities, companies, and animals is that people can come in and inhabit the shell like a coral reef of the cities and regrow and keep the city going.
Yeah, so the cities are really the perpetual the perpetual machine, I guess, in that comparison. That's what I like. I like that. What does it take to make the latter two perpetual also? And that's, I guess, one of the questions I walked away from that book with. Because if you're just leveling up a scale system, whenever you're comparing different layers of that, one holistic system, similar concepts can be applied anywhere. So what does it take to make the organisms or the companies continue under those same circumstances? There's an analogy somewhere where that sort of science can be layered down at the other brackets.
Well, so in his short writing on this, or one of the lectures I saw him give, he describes how companies, you're born, you accelerate, you grow, and then when you level off, you really only have one choice to extend, which is to go buy up other small companies and suck out the value, and that gives you get to be like a vampire where you suck out the value until eventually you hit a point where there's so much bureaucracy in your system, there's so many systems you've tried to cram together, so much scar tissue that you keep buying more companies, but no matter how much blood you suck out of them, you can't stave off the fact that your company is no longer efficient, and so it dies.
Yeah. I think...
do you think that your metaphor is going to be the same? Will it require humans to be vampires in some weird way?
I think it requires like a different like modeling of the company. And then that's something like I'm not like actively like pursuing any unique model with Wand, but like something I'm being conscious of like as a founder in a company that I hope to scale or that I will scale. But it's where those differences can be established early on from a cultural perspective, to maintain that flexibility at the topmost stage. Because I think like the key thing from like the company viewpoint is like it's flexibility. They can't make decisions fast when they can't pivot hard. Like the term pivot is like common in like our space. Like you pivot into something right or you pivot out of something bad if you figure out what's going good and what's going wrong. But whenever you're huge, like Microsoft, if Microsoft learns they're doing something right, they've got a lot of money and resources behind them. But I mean, you made this point with like the bureaucracies of like how decisions have to be passed up and down that funnel. They can't pivot hard into something right as fast as a startup can, right? And a startup can make decisions rapidly and make moves rapidly. And then Microsoft can, throw $50 million on the table and say, give me you, basically. And then like they've essentially like enveloped that ideation into their behemoth vampire at that point. So what does it take? What does it take at scale to be able to be like perpetually, a perpetual growth company? I don't know, but it's something that I think about a lot.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
I think flexibility is a big deal, though.
There was a paper one time that I read not all that long ago, maybe a year ago or so, called Bullshit Jobs. And in it, the guy, he's making a case about politics that I'm not actually making, but he makes the case about how there's a big percentage, some might say 40%, some might say 60% of the white collar class in the United States have completely bullshit jobs. They don't actually do anything at work, and maybe they have 4 hours or 5 hours of work, but we actually have automated away all of their work, because once we had computers and cell phones and email, you could compress the amount of work that it took administrative people to do, or even a professional. The amount of work that they have to do to accomplish their goals is way, way down. And yet they keep their jobs and they work the 4 hours a week, but then they go to meetings that are endless where they don't actually have the power to make decisions. It's just a group of people that get together that say, my boss is going to want to know about this and weigh in. So then they go away and then they come back and they make the most tiny of changes. And then the other people are saying there's a bunch of jobs where we're trying to tabulate and prove that we are getting work done. And so we spend all of our time counting impressions or, customer survey things and collating this data. And then you have to have managers of people that are collating that data. And then those managers have to have managers. And so he's basically saying we have a welfare system among the white collar class, because if you're in a regulated industry, the government wants to see you adding jobs, not taking them away. So they're not trying to slough off the dead weight, because they need to have those people there, because the government, in order to give them the regulations to do whatever it is, maybe water quality or different chemicals you're using, that's the arrangement, is that you have to keep those people on. Have you ever heard that idea?
No, yeah. Well, from you like a week ago.
I'm totally enthralled by the idea. It could be completely wrong, but I saw a lot of that going on in the corporation, like whether it was the World Bank or Monsanto. Like, there are really highly competent people, but they don't have the work that they're doing is nowhere near what they're capable of.
Right. Oh no, yeah, 100%. Like that's, those are the compromises not even a compromise, because then that's where I'm trying to be conscious of like not making compromises to be made just because they have, quote unquote, not quote unquote like social impact, but like, quantifying things that don't matter. I think like that's the key, maybe one of the key ideas of like a lot of those positions. It's like counting, I'm doing data analytics, blah, 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 or not data analytics. Data analysts have their space for sure. Like I'm managing my data, especially now, probably like 40% of my day, but like counting numbers that don't matter to put together plans that will have no impact on return to shareholders, like all of that waste.
Sustainability reports. Yeah, sustainability reports. And that's an unpopular opinion, because people are going to say, hey, we want to know how much carbon they're emitting. But there are hundreds, thousands of people in the United States that all they are doing is counting numbers that are almost uncountable. Or if they are countable, it's so abstract and so complicated that you could throw thousands of accountants at it, which is what they're doing. Not only do you have people that are tabulating for these sustainability reports, but then you have the people that make the reports, and then you have the people that audit the reports, and then you have the lawyers that look over it. And it is all a giant tax for a document that maybe people demand that they want, but nobody reads that thing.
Right. Yeah. You take the high level blurb, and it's like, if we understand the high level problem of why we're counting those numbers, or maybe not even the problem, but the high level whatever we need to understand to be able to act on that data, then we don't need to know the granulars and waste the resources on those granulars. And I think, like, to your point, that's a lot of what happens at that stage is because of, keeping people busy, whatever it might be, we're worrying and allocating time, money, and attention, which is worth more than the latter two, to counting up those numbers. And like, if you get the concepts, like I can't remember if we talked about it a lot, but something I think a lot about, like, especially like trying to run a company, is like depth versus like span knowledge. Like Ken Wilber, who's like a Jungian, guy, like he's kind of dissolved some of Jung's ideas into his books, but he talks about like depth versus span as it pertains to consciousness and some other things. But I think about it as it pertains to knowledge and like, time allocation to your practice. Like if you have the high level concept, do you need to know the granulars to be able to act, moving forward, especially as a company? Like both have their place. Specialists have their place, but, and then I guess that's where it goes back to a company perspective. Like I don't need to know 100% of how to program, or 100% of marketing, or 100% of sales, or 100% of operations. But if I know like 10% of each to make up the whole picture, and I have that span, then you're able to delegate very, very effectively in each of those like kind of respective like, vertical silos.
I think that's true. And I would have trouble giving somebody advice that they should rely on their ability to have that span unless they're going to be something like an entrepreneur. Because
that's where like risk and instinct comes into place, is whenever you're acting on span and concepts.
And there's risk in depth, right? Because you could get a depth of some skill that's completely not needed, or the technology just gets blown away.
Right.
But if you become a master at one thing, your ability to transfer that mastery to another thing is generally pretty high.
Yeah.
But when you're in the span business, then you've got to convince somebody, hey, you should trust me that I can blend together these things in a way that will add a synergy, as opposed to stand atop of this group and dictate to you how things ought to be.
Sure. Yeah. And I think both has their value. And that's sort of like the dichotomy, and like the whole picture comes into place, and that you can't have like a holistic system without both. Like if anybody in an organization is a span player, then there's no depth execution. But if the right people to be span players are in those positions, then they're able to have a broader understanding of the full picture to be able to make the decisions that need to be executed at like the vertical level, I guess.
And maybe so I have like, you could probably tell in my voice, I have an amount of polarity about the sustainability issue, because I see people that were like me. When I was in college, it wasn't global warming, it was poverty. And it was like, look at the people in these places far away. And that inspired me. And I went to Africa, right? And I joined the Peace Corps to try and help poor people that were far away. I see these kids taking on huge amounts of college debt, unimaginable amounts of college debt, to become an expert in a thing that if the company wasn't in whatever position they're in to be producing those sustainability reports, that job wouldn't exist. And furthermore, they are never actually going to, their skill is so amorphous that it's not deep, but they've paid to have deep skills, and they're not an engineer, they're not a chemist, they're not a nurse.
Yeah, and you can say it doesn't matter what they've gotten that depth knowledge is it doesn't matter. And nobody told them when they were young and idealistic that they were making that decision, that what they're investing tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars in does not matter and will not pay them the rest of their lives.
Right. And
period.
And even if it does, even if some college administrator says, or these companies would show up, and to show up well to the students, they say, look how sustainable we are. Look at all these jobs we have in sustainability. We're looking for sustainability people.
Right.
But it's terminal. There's nothing down there. It's not like, hey, if you are a chemist and you come to our company, even if we get rid of that product or that way of thinking, there are a lot of other things that you could do in chemistry.
Sure.
And so I see huge volumes of talent get engaged in that. They then know that they have to keep the charade going, that these sustainability reports, and I'm not saying there's no value in knowing whether or not you're getting better at less polluting, but the way that they're structured, if you actually go read one, and most people I would say have never read even one.
Talk in circles.
Right.
Yeah.
They talk in circles. And then this person who has something to add to the world now feels stuck, and they have to convince themselves, they have to ignore their Damon, which is telling them this is a waste of time. You're recording meaningless numbers. They have to, muffle that down, and then they continue in the charade.
Yeah. No,
I
100%.
could be wrong. I don't want to I could be totally wrong here. I'm just one guy's opinion, but it breaks my heart when I hear kids telling me they're doing sustainability stuff, because I think they're screwed.
Yeah. And you could apply that same thought process to a number of other industries. And that's I guess part of where my anxiety came into play in terms of biomedical engineering is pretty practical. Could have floated around, but making that decision and taking on those debt decisions at an age where I had no idea what I wanted to apply it. And I've known since I was in high school that I would never work, a 9-to-5 the rest of my life. So to be going down that kind of college path, insinuating that was the case, thankfully acknowledged that it was a problem very, very quickly. And
I could never have done what you did. There's no way. I mean, I went to college, had no idea what I wanted to be, but knew I needed that degree from a brand that would be good for me, that would allow me to hold my head up high. It was essentially going and buying a mask.
Yeah.
I will say this, though. Now, at this point in my life, probably in the last 6 months to a year, I've started to use my philosophy background that I had to have at Marquette, and it has transformed my life. So thank God I did get it, because I don't know how I would have gotten the foundational background. You can, maybe just, library card. But I think there are a lot of people that do that, and I think it's a charade.
Yeah.
And I had no business taking out the level of loans I took out. I had and that's why I don't hold those kids. We talk shit about these kids taking out these huge college loans.
We don't know what we're doing. See, that's why I only last as long as I did, because I never took out a loan. I did the savings thing, and then it got to the stage where a loan was going to have to be taken out, and I'm very, very debt averse. I'm not afraid of a lot of things, but I'm afraid of the idea of debt.
What made you afraid of debt?
Deep question. Yeah. I've 2008 really hit the Anderson family pretty hard. So we've been climbing out of it really since, and I don't want to ever see that be the stage for,
you'd have been 10 or something like that, or you're younger. Yeah.
But I mean, we were kept in the loop. I think, and, it was a learning experience, but I think, and I attribute 100% of, my general mentality and drive to my dad, but he made sure that we understood what we had to learn from that experience, I guess, even at that age. And I'll carry that with me the rest of my life.
A dad that can share that with his children without scarring them or making them feel bad, but doing it as a lesson.
Yeah.
That's not just sharing. That's not just staring down your own dragon. That's teaching other kids, these are the lessons you need to learn for yourself.
Right. No, 100%.
Wow.
Yeah. And and then that's where it's there's a small bit of overcompensation in terms of my fear that I took away from that towards debt. But I've gone out of my way to make decisions that would not put me in a position where, because of things like entropy and chaos, I could find myself in a similar scenario. From I guess a strategic standpoint of not taking on debt when maybe even sometimes I should, in order to leveraging
a move.
Yeah, leveraging a move, right? But kind of pivoting around some of those opportunities to avoid that, that's where like I try to acknowledge the overcompensation. But 100%, I have no regret for having had that learning experience at that age, because I never need to have it again.
Yeah, that's great, man.
Yeah.
I one of my earliest memories, and I'm sure I've constructed most of this in my mind, but normally when I was a kid, my dad would come home and a shout would go through the house. You know, I'm the middle child of 7, but at this time it would have just been 4 of us. A shout would go out, Dad's home, and everybody turn off the TV and, you know, run around and clean things up because Dad was coming home. But I remember when Black Monday hit, like in 1987. So I would have been like 6 years old. And I remember my mother coming in and telling us, "It's a bad day.
Yeah.
Your father's had a bad day." I think we ended up like getting dressed in better clothes and we, you know, all had dinner, but we were not to cause any problems. And that left such a taste in my mouth for the power of the wave that is the stock market, that I feel like it gave me, it's like having a healthy respect to the ocean. Don't ever turn your back on the ocean. That's how I feel about the stock market.
Yeah.
Because of that.
Yeah.
Probably to my own detriment at various times, but thank goodness, because I am impetuous and high risk and, you know, let's throw things, but not because of that. I don't have the same thing.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah.
So let's change subjects a little bit. How in the world did you get the background that you have in Jungian psychology or Jeffrey West or these people that you're reading? How do you encounter these new ideas? And you know, your 10% is enough to carry you through a lot of heavy conversations. How have you gotten the depth that you're able to traverse the landscape of these complicated ideas?
I read and watch YouTube quite a bit, and I do the former is the one before the last one. I always get former and latter mixed up. I read more than I watch YouTube. I probably watch high level YouTube videos to get to walk away with concepts. Yeah, I think YouTube is span and books are depth.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
I'll read a book on something I want to know a lot about, and I kind of got this idea from Musk. Like my grandfather got me Musk's book, and in there it talked about how like he'd read like a wide variety of things to give him that span knowledge to be able to kind of tie knots between industries that had never been tied before. I've been like a religious reader for like years. And
how do you find these books? It's that you go find them yourself or you look around for recommendations?
Well, through like I walked away from our conversations with, you know, like over the last like couple weeks with a ton of books that I'll be reading moving forward, like stuff like that. And then the list just like compiles up from there. And then there's some where it's like I'll walk into like the Shadow Dance book about the shadow integration. I wasn't looking for that book, but I rolled into Left Bank on Euclid and it was down in their used section for $6. So I was like, I'll read this. And like I said, it was one of like the best 3 to 5 books that I read in the last year. And I've read quite a few over the last couple months.
Books, when I was a kid or even younger, I just voracious reader, read all the time, loved it. And probably the greatest gift that the gods ever gave me was the ability to read quickly.
Yeah.
Because like once you have that, then the pain of reading is not that bad. But now for me to even start a book, like I used to do the thing where I start a book and then I put it down when I'm not interested. Yeah. I don't do that anymore. I'm like picking up that book because I want to find out what's inside of this tome. Mm-hmm. And I think I've probably become too ordered on that I'm so fixated on I want to read this one and then this one and then this one that the randomness doesn't happen very much.
Yeah, the randomness I think is important. And that's where I say I'd agree that like if that's your mentality, then you should take that back a couple paces, because I'll like let a book come across and it's like I don't know what I'm going to find out in here. But somebody put months and years of energy into putting this out there into the world. This was like their gall move of like, I'm going to take these thoughts I have and put them out into the ether, whether it's in a story or nonfiction or whatever it is. And somebody's going to read it and walk away with it. Most of the time, like I'll walk away with new ideas in any given book.
That's a great way. So my sister is just finishing up a book that she's written, and I could not be happier that she's going to put this out there because she is not a high risk person, not flashy or flamboyant. She's just, she does her things every day, but she had the gall to put this book together. And now she's going through the very last stages of like, how do I market it? How do I price it? What's the cover look like? All these things. And I was thinking like, the gall it takes to put out a book, because it feels so much more permanent. It really is hours and hours or weeks of your time versus a podcast. Like, you have to have the gall to start.
Yeah.
But it's not like I can just be like, well, that's just what Ben and I talked about that day. It wasn't, this is an idea that I have deeply thought about, studied, and carefully placed into this thing. Writing a book's a whole nother level of gall.
Yeah, no, yeah. Kudos to your sister. Very, very badass to like carry that out to the end, period.
It'll be cool. She is this incredibly creative person that managed a lot of like college students.
Yeah.
And so she figured out like, how do you get college students, maybe like a residence hall people, how do you get these people that are never had a job before to coalesce, work together, follow the rules? They're responsible for people that are almost their age. So how do they transcend the problems of working for people that they're close in age with? It'll be a cool book, and I'll have her on the podcast. It'll be cool.
No, for sure. Yeah, she's got one reader already. It sounds interesting.
Actually, you would like it.
Yeah.
Do you have a book in you?
Do I have a book in me? That's where I'm saying, like, yeah, kudos to your sister. I have sat down and, like, I say tried, and they might be finished at some point. I have a book in me for sure.
And is it a book that's a biography, or is it a book of your ideas, or what kind of, or fiction?
I have a book of, I think there's a biography, but I think it's too early for the biography unless it's volumes. And then I've got ideas that I want to spit out there. And we've talked about some of those ideas high level already.
What are some of the ideas that have been spinning around in your head now lately?
Yeah, and this is where it seems like mumbo jumbo, but it is what it is, and I'll throw them out there into the ether.
If people have stayed this long into the podcast, your mumbo jumbo isn't going to scare them away. They'll take it. Point. Yeah,
I think I think that there's an analogy somewhere between and that's where, like, so I guess background that's only being recapped for the sake of the audience is, like, I came down that one morning after our like 6 hours of car conversation, and I'd heard of it before, but we talked deeply on the concept of the Ouroboros.
Oh yeah.
And that's what really tied some of these concepts and I've got this book here, like people in the video can see it, but I carry these books in my back pocket and I just write ideas, and I've been writing some of these like high level thoughts for so long, but that really tied together. I think there's an analogy somewhere between like human relationships as they pertain to their impact on each other, and I guess like to make that more like conversible, or like pick up the idea, like we talked about the infinity and the epsilon, and how it's not just a one-to-one, and then that's where it was tied together for me for the Ouroboros, is it's not a one-to-one, like vector back and forth. It's like a continuous cycle, and one affects the rest, and then like everything just
let me see if I can decode some of this. So the Ouroboros that you're talking about, and I have a terrible time
professional speaker sitting across from
pronouncing this, is one of the first symbols that existed in civilization. Like, some people say when humans first developed consciousness was when they were able to take an idea and project it out into the world. And one of the first ideas that they put, that I could put something out there and you would understand what it means. So the genesis is, the first thing they drew was probably a circle. And that circle, from now, when you go look at artifacts or drawings or petroglyphs, the full circle can sometimes be drawn as a snake eating its tail. And that signifies everything and nothing all at once, no beginning and no end. And if you think about it, that is the beginning of a circle, is the beginning of the yin yang.
Yeah.
Because if you want to divide that thing into dichotomies, like we were talking about before, there would be a split there. And then that split can represent, black and white. Some people would say order and chaos, or good and evil, or infinity and epsilon.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about that comes from a conversation that I was having with my buddy Rob Long, who goes by Plantimals and is an exceptional guy. He was saying, we play this game called the dichotomies game, where you name one word that is archetypal, it's in its perfect form, and then you name what's opposite of it. But the key to this game is you can't just say a word and then add an antonym. You're not just saying it's, a cat is not a dog. You actually have to, a cat and a dog are different because they are actually different things.
Right.
And so infinity being like, going out for forever, there's no end to it. And epsilon being that it's the closest number to getting to nothing without actually being nothing.
Right.
So it's infinitely regressive. I don't exactly know how to describe
and
that.
that's where you tied it together for me. So I've been trying to tie that analogy to math and like putting it in an analogy as it relates to light and light through like intensity and refraction. Like what are...
You have no idea, man. I have a buddy named Kate Crosby and another one named Nick Cizik. They are going to love this. So hit it. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's the analogy between light as it interacts through whether it be a membrane and whether it's refraction or if it's intensity? I don't know enough. Like I know I'm pretty good at math, but I don't know enough to like put the right numbers in place. But like that's been my high level idea of like what's the mathematical analogy? Like if you consider one human looking at another as like light, and their impact on an endpoint. Like what's the mathematical sort of formula for that? That's my high level concept.
You lost me. I don't understand.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Yeah. So so take it back to the infinity and the epsilon, where our conversation with the Ouroboros tied it back to me and kind of changed how I've been thinking about some of these ideas for a while. Is if everything is the Ouroboros, the dichotomy always loops back to itself. The infinity is the biggest number possible before reaching, what, and epsilon is the smallest point possible before reaching zero. Like it's the same endpoint. And then that's where we kind of had the, like, my infinity is your epsilon and your epsilon is my infinity as it pertains to us interacting with each other, which is, I guess, calling it back to like my analogy with math is...
Let me see if I can capture this, and then you can go to the math. So one of the things, so Rob talks about this idea that a good portion of the meaning of life, in fact, maybe the meaning of life, is an intersubjective experience.
Yes.
It is, I am in myself and I know myself, and I express an idea in some way, and I can watch you get that idea.
Right.
And then that is because you and I both say, we see this, I often think of it as like, monkeys or primates somewhere, going, and then the other monkey understanding what he's saying, and those two no longer being alone, at least for that brief moment.
Sure.
And what you're saying is the way that this relates to the infinity and the epsilon is the infinity is knowing myself. All that is me and everything that I understand about myself. And you can never get all the way down there. You can never fully integrate your shadow or completely hear your Damon. But on your side of the equation, if I'm thinking I can never actually fully understand you, because the closer that I get to you and understanding your subjective experience, it somehow makes it pull away from mine. So for every bit that I'm away from my understanding and I accept your understanding of the world, that's where that dichotomy lives.
Right. And measuring the impact of like your intentioned backed effort of changing my understanding, I guess, like in that like relationship, what was the term you used? The
the intersubjective experience.
In that intersubjective experience, what's the measurability of your effort to impact my experience, and like how that's where like the math comes in, and trying to relate that in an analogy to light because light is weird because photon, and we talked a little bit about this too, and that photons everything behaves as waves and particles until observed. Light doesn't interact usually. The key word is usually, and it under very, very extraneous circumstances do photons like actually have an effect on each other whenever they're shown through each other, like two opposing beams, and like and then that's where it's like there is a book there, but there's nothing there yet. These are the ideas, but the next step I think of getting there was our conversation with the Ouroboros. That's why I've been very hot and bothered recently thinking about some of that stuff.
Well, I think that I think it is completely understandable that when you encounter these ideas that you become captivated by them, because in many ways, the reason I think Jung is so profound, and I also think he's making a huge surge into the consciousness of at least the people I'm running around with, but it's that when you grab onto a symbol, it both explains what you are thinking about without words, and it does it, and at the same time, it doesn't explain it, right? It can contain the value of your feeling about something, but it also means something totally different to you. And I actually, normally I have a book that just says symbols over there, but it's over there right now because I was reading it this morning.
Yeah.
But I have become totally enthralled, not with the symbols themselves, but with what meaning other people put in that symbolism, and where are the symbols that are so archetypal, just like the Monet painting, that whether I'm seeing it 3,000 years later or the guy drew it on that cliff, a long time ago, we understand the same meaning.
Yeah.
And the fact that he didn't tell me, it's not words, it's something else, and yet we can still understand it as it transcends time. I love that. I love it.
Yeah. No, being able to carry that stuff through, because time is its own variable. So
Tell me more. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, it being able to carry something through space is one thing, and space and time, like that was Einstein's whole point, is that they're the same thing. But being able to carry something, like I can pass my water across to you and you're carrying it across space, but carrying something across time from a legacy standpoint, and I'm far too young to be thinking about legacy, but I do, but you think about with something with the Monet, to have the power and mastery in your art or whatever it is you do. And then that's where I appreciate your idea of and I already forgot the term again,
intersubjective experience.
Intersubjective experience, because if you can just affect one other person with an intersubjective experience, then you've established your legacy in time, I guess, if that makes sense.
Say more.
If I've affected you just enough to affect something else that affects something else, that's where it's the perpetuality of it. And the Ouroboros of how that measurability can be affected of what can come of a spontaneous interaction and how it carries on from there. And then that's where you kind of have to zoom out, because a painting is material in that it can represent the ego and the individual who did it. But the hero's journey maybe just being, Blanche of Castile, right? Where you're just pushing that thing that's pushing the next thing, or wherever you are in that chain.
I get it. So this is this. I love talking with you, man. The idea that you really smacked me across the face with when we were driving was the same thing that you were saying about the impermanence. You put a painting on in an art museum, and it can feel like it's there forever. It's housed in perfect climate conditions, but it's on a canvas. Eventually it will wear away.
Right.
Someday we won't be able to care for it in the way that we do now. But your actions in the world, while they seem completely impermanent, I am going through the grocery store and there's a woman checking my bags, or checking me out, and I am excited and happy and tell her a joke, and she gets in a good mood, and now the next 15 people that she sees, she tells that joke to. It lightens the mood, and each one of those people go to their job or back to their home or whatever challenges that they're facing, and that energy resonates into there.
Yeah.
And while it seems like, well, I can't measure that, I can't know that that's what's going on, you can definitely say, I'd rather be pushing good energy into the world as opposed to bad energy, because all those little orbits that you've hit and knocked off of their axis and made more positive, that is what's going into the world, and it is what will come back to you.
Right.
And it does feel like once you start breaking it down in simpler terms, it starts saying not only should I want to check my ego so I'm not angry with the guy that yells at me because I'm in his driveway, but I should also, not only is it just better for me not to be angry, having my emotions drive my actions, but also by being better to him, he goes in and treats his wife better. His wife then treats the dogs better. The dogs don't bite the neighbor. The neighbor then gets along better with people. It's the best way to be. And it starts entirely with, can I control my ego enough to put positive energy into the world as opposed to negative?
Yeah. And then that's where time comes back into play, is that goes on forever, and it's behind you your entire life.
Wow. Yeah. You're right.
Yeah.
And it does transcend time in a way that the canvas can't.
Right.
Man, I love talking to you.
Anytime, man.
So, tell me about your friendships.
My friendships.
Yeah, like, do you have the same friends do you stay in touch with the people that you knew when you were a kid? How have you thought about friendship right now?
Yeah, I've kept pretty good contact with a small group of like really, really solid friends that I made in high school, you know, taking those trips and kind of being idealistic in similar ways and kind of all on our own, like, you know, like you say, heroes' journeys, and getting to watch that alternative growth. I think my friend group and I are very, very similar in a lot of ways, but we're different in a lot of ways. And it's the ways that I'm most different from each one of my friends that I'm really, really attracted to. It was in that shadow dance book, actually. I had to write down in here and like what the biggest differences and the things I admire and the things I even don't like in like my 5 closest friends. And like writing those things down, I realized, like I've insinuated, but I realized like hard writing the thought on paper. These are the things that draw me to these people because I dislike this about them, and this is how we're different. You don't have to
name a person, but give me an example. What do you mean?
I wish I hadn't just switched books. Well, creativity. Creativity is a great example. Like that's a theme across my whole friend group. Like I'll name drop like Tanner's, Sam's, Cole's. You know, I've got a group of very, very immensely creatively talented friends, and I don't like while I'm creatively talented, like in strategy and business and whatever, I don't have a whole lot of like material creativity where I'm able to like create my own art myself and put it out into the world. Like anybody listening who's made it to this point, go check out Cole Ray on Spotify. He just dropped. I'm super psyched for him, but just immensely talented guy, and that's something that I'll
include a link. So this is a buddy of yours, and he's doing music now.
Yeah, he's doing music. He just moved out to LA. He's going to be taking off. He's doing his thing, and I'm super psyched for him. But that's the draw point with the friendship, and that like I don't like jealously crave that talent, but I'm attracted to it in him and his expression about how he's doing that in the world. And I'm like so immensely happy for the guy that he's able to like purely express that art in the world.
One of the best things that ever happened to me was when I figured out that if I can articulate to another person, a person that I admire or a person I respect, what it is about them that I respect or admire,
right,
then it allows me to begin to integrate it into my own life.
Right.
Because until I can name what it is in them that I really like or that I think that I'm drawn to, it's just amorphous, right? They're just a person and I'm like, oh, I like being around them. They make me smile or they make me laugh or, you know, they're kind of creative. But it's a whole different thing when you begin to be able to say, Ben, you know, the way that you are authentically yourself and the way that you say as precisely as you can what you're actually thinking, and you're willing to change what you were saying in order to be more precise, even though you know it makes you look confused. I really admire that about you, and I want, and now all of a sudden I can start bringing that into my own life. That was one of the great skills, but I had never until just now thought that I should write that in a journal.
Yeah. Well, it's, I think to use your terminology, it's like I just had that thought while you were like explaining that, is all my best friends are adversaries. Uh-huh. Like, yeah, you said the other day, like the best spouse, friend, whatever, like enemy versus adversary was like one of the running themes, but
from Barry Flinchbaugh, right?
Yeah, from Barry Flinchbaugh.
So for anybody that doesn't know, Ben was actually in that interview. He drove me there. We were there, and Professor Flinchbaugh kept turning and talking to Ben. But he has this concept about enemy or adversary, and you should go back and listen to the video, because he's saying your enemies, you will, you know, picture them as the worst possible light that you can. You will vilify them. You're willing to do terrible things to them. But your adversaries are not necessarily blocking you from succeeding. Mm-hmm. They're just preventing you from doing the path that is of least resistance, right? They're putting resistance up, and the path that you'll find is generally better than the one you would have gone had they not gotten in your way.
Yeah.
And I totally agree. Yeah. Having a worthy adversary as a wife is a really powerful thing.
Sure. No doubt. Yeah.
And friends too.
Yeah. No, my best buddy in the whole world is my biggest adversary in the whole world. Yeah. And
Well, I would say
there's a backstory there that'll come out at some point. Yeah.
Two people that I am really very close with, Rob Long and Travis Liebig. They are like, and I'm always so mad at them when they won't just accept the thing that I'm saying, and I just want them to go along with me.
Sure.
But if they did, the value of that friendship would degrade immensely, right?
Sure.
Like, because the real value is I want their respect, and yet they won't give it unless it's earned. And that's, I mean, if you look around at your world and you don't have friends like that, time to get moving.
Yeah.
Because your Damon definitely can't come out if you don't have worthy adversaries around you.
No, 100%.
Ben, I am so afraid that the tape's going to run out that I
know. I've been thinking the same thing.
So,
my watch is broken.
I have absolutely loved this. I will have you back on if there's only 2 or 3 people that are still listening because we did all of our woo-woo stuff. That's completely fine. I started this podcast so that I could create a gravity well where other people would fall into my orbit, people that I couldn't expect. And this is one of the great pleasures, is having met you.
Wow,
if people wanted to be in touch with you, find you out in social media, how would they do that?
Yeah, social media is a great one. I've abdicated from all of that recently. Go to my website, benjaminbanderson.com, or
you're on Twitter?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I've got one tweet in the last 2 years, and it's me retweeting us driving together. I'm on Twitter at benanderson421. Tweet me, or shoot me an email, me@benjaminbanderson.com.
Good, man. I really hope people do. There are a lot of people that I think would love to talk about your light idea. My audience is very sharp, very creative, and I hope they do. So, thanks, Ben.
Beautiful, man. Thank you so much.
Great.